and used, amongst other things, to test the concept that these dwellings had been constructed above pits. The sunken house nearby was created on the same assumption, although the concept is no longer supported. There is also a reasonably substantial family house providing insight regarding furnishings and living conditions of the day. Next to it is the hall, hardly a great hall, illustrating that in a small community such as this, it was little larger than many other buildings. These reconstructions were aided by archaeologists' interpretation of Beowulf's poem. Beowulf's struggle with Grendel took place in the king's mead hall, its name indicating this alcoholic drink had an important role in ceremonies carried out here. In Seamus Heaney's outstanding Beowulf translation, an attendant stood by with a decorated pitcher, pouring bright helpings of mead, and the minstrel sang, filling the hall with his clear voice. But that was a far larger structure than existed at West Stow.
Well, the interesting thing about West Stow is that archaeology can only give us so much of the information. From that we get burned posts, we get some remains about the houses, but the Beowulf story gives us much more information on things that archaeology can't tell us. For example, in the Beowulf story, we get this idea of a hall surrounded by houses, and that's how we've reconstructed West Stow.
At Whitchurst, close to the Kentish coast where the earliest Saxon warriors landed, another hall being reconstructed formerly covered 200 square metres, or over 1,800 square feet in area, more resembling Heorot in scale, although in the poet's rich imagination the latter surpassed all. Yet there would have been similarities, even though a king's hall must have contained finely carved furniture and been hung with colourful tapestries. Hrothgar's Heorot had been wonder of the world forever, a hall of halls where he doled out rings and talks at the table. Gold threads shone in the wall hangings. West Stow buildings help understand Anglo-Saxon daily life, their weaving house indicating that this was a society dependent upon specialised skills, while the varying quality of other structures reveal not all village dwellers were of the same social status. Buildings had panels of wattle and daub between their timber frames, a mixture of clay, wool or hair and cow dung spread over interwoven hazel rods. A system long continued in British rural areas, either washed with lime or spread with tallow to render them waterproof. What people made up this apparently peaceful community, and how would the exploits of Beowulf and his loyal band have affected them?
The people who lived here in West Stow, these early English, these first Anglo-Saxons, were a mixture of different tribes from different places. But archaeology tells us that they carried spears and shields, and the more important of them actually had swords. So in that way, they are very, very similar to the kind of warriors we hear about in the Beowulf story. I think the other thing that is interesting is that we're talking about a small village here with not that many people in it. And in these early times, the times of Beowulf, a gang of maybe 10 men is quite a formidable force. And so it's interesting that the scale of these early operations. 10 warriors would indeed be a force to reckon with. And if they were skilled warriors, like Beowulf and his men, then they certainly would have been a formidable adversary for anybody.
The fierce independence of the Anglo-Saxon is perhaps indicated by British Christianity's ready adoption of pagan designs and traditions. Northern culture and its designs would spread widely, which is appropriate since Beowulf's peoples believed a great serpent lay tail and mouth beneath the sea, forming a circle encompassing all mankind. From this may have developed the convoluted ribbon-like designs seen in Christian manuscript illustration, artwork, carving and jewellery, probably originating in a Nordic-influenced Ireland. In contrast with the often poor and sandy soils of former Baltic homelands, whose subsistence-level economy inspired raiding and warfare in order to survive, England's attraction lay in it being a naturally rich country possessing woodlands and soils that bestowed prosperity upon the newcomers. This induced the mass immigration, although whether Romano-British peoples were absorbed or driven westwards is still conjectural. Anglo-Saxon tribes would soon lap against the Welsh mountains, and like the Romans before them conclude that containment of its warlike peoples was better than outright conquest. By the mid-8th century, Mercia's still pagan king Offa had marked and protected his territories with what is still Europe's longest earthwork. Offa's dyke runs along the north-south length of Wales from Chepstow to near Prestatyn on the North Wales coast, much of its 170 miles of mound and ditch still clearly visible crossing border valley and hill. Offa was one of the greatest kings of Mercia, a kingdom that frequently vied for the paramount position amongst all British kingdoms. His dyke, that drew a boundary between Saxon and Welsh territory, remains one of the greatest engineering works undertaken in Britain prior to the Industrial Revolution, demonstrating the power and organisation of these so-called Dark Age kings. Indeed, Offa's Mercia has been suggested as possible birthplace of the Beowulf epic, because the poem contains a song of praise to an ancestral Nordic king named Offa. Such fulsome praise, providing their monarch with reflected glory, appears to have been typical Saxon practice.
What we see in the case of Offa the Old, though he is subsumed to be a specifically Mercian ancestor in the Mercian royal pedigree, almost certainly because it suited Offa's own political circumstance of the 8th century, we see evidence on a wider basis that Offa was regarded as a general English ancestor of the people as a whole. And so we get Offas in other pedigrees. And this is an important point, I think is sometimes overlooked by the Mercian local patriots.
Like its Nordic predecessors, Offa's palace would have been a visible symbol of authority and wealth, wherein would gather the king's personal warriors, whose loyalty depended much upon such gifts he could bestow. When raiding and warfare was impossible, king and warriors would carouse in torch-lit halls, at tables laden with platters bearing pig meat or eels, while mead, beer and cider flowed in copious measure. Food and drink was a required provision for service, but other gifts